Namaskara and welcome to BIC Talks, a podcast brought to you by Bangalore International Centre, where we present conversations that move, inform, and encourage discourse.
Let me just say something that's been troubling me for a very long time. The vocabulary of the Constitution and our received wisdom when it comes to questions of equality needs to be looked at again. I have developed a massive allergy to this expression backward. It has all kinds of connotations to this which need to be thrown out of the window, and in itself leads to a process of alienation and othering. The concept of an other backward class is even more hideous. It's even more hideous. You have to find better, more inclusive, less segregationist expressions for what you are trying to achieve here. In contemporary language, this can have no place, and unfortunately, it informs the decision-making process again and again and again. We are unable in the judiciary, and I'm telling you this from experience, to make the necessary nuanced adjustments. I'm not even saying distinctions, I'm saying adjustments towards achieving, equality is again a difficult concept, some level of acceptable societal parity. It becomes very difficult between religions, it becomes very difficult between gender, it becomes extraordinarily difficult when you have anything involving reservations, caste, and so on. It's a hideously complex business.
In this episode, Mary E. John, former professor at the Center for Women's Development Studies at New Delhi, Rehmat Tarikare, former professor of Kannada Literature Studies at the Kannada University at Hampi, Justice Gautam Patel, former Bombay High Court judge, and Harish Narsappa, senior advocate and co-founder of DAKSH, examine how the principles of equality and fraternity have shaped India's democratic journey over the past 75 years. They will explore the relevance of these constitutional values in addressing contemporary challenges in the daily lives of Indian citizens, like social inequities and polarisation. The discussion will also highlight the indigenous roots of these values within Karnataka's rich philosophical and cultural traditions. Through these diverse perspectives, the panel will reflect on how these constitutional values can be actualized in governance, culture, policy, and daily life. This episode was adapted from an event that took place at the Bangalore International Centre in January 2025.
Good morning, everyone. It's the 75th year of the Republic. So this is our first event on a Republic Day. So we have DAKSH has never had any event on Republic Day because we thought it's an overcrowded day with lots of functions. But this time, because it's the 75th year and we were doing, together with BIC, we were conducting this series of events on We the People. We thought we should do something on Republic Day this year. And we are lucky to have a wonderful panel today. What we did through the We the People series is talk about different values in the Constitution. We had Professor Rajiv Bhargava talk about democracy and the threat to democracy, political liberty, and other issues in this auditorium. Then we had a discussion with Professor Karthik Muralidharan on economic justice and how economic freedom under the Constitution. Then we had Barka Dutt speak on freedom of speech and freedom of the press. And if you go down the values that we aspire to in the preamble. There are two more aspects apart from justice and liberty and freedom, that is equality and fraternity. So we thought we will talk about these two concepts today. We toyed with the idea of having two separate events, one on equality and one on fraternity. But after discussion amongst ourselves and then also reading what Ambedkar writes about why he introduced fraternity into the preamble. Now, fraternity was not part of the objectives resolution when the Constituent Assembly was formed and an objectives resolution was first introduced. And that objectives resolution was primarily based on what the Congress had declared when they announced Purna Swaraj in 1930. And that's how 26 January became relevant. Otherwise, 26 January didn't have any significance in India's historical, chain of events as such. I mean, we had many other days we could have chosen to become a republic, but 26 January was in 1930 when they said, we want full independence, full Swaraj, and the date they had announced was the coincided with 26 January 1950. So, but the objectives resolution did not have fraternity. And Ambedkar introduced fraternity, and this is something, there is a lot of discussion now and new scholarly research has revealed that fraternity was almost single-handedly introduced by Ambedkar. So if there's one value in the preamble or in the constitution that we can directly attribute to Ambedkar, it is fraternity. Because he said, equality without fraternity is meaningless. And he comes, I mean, we all know his background and the prejudices that he faced and came up against. So he thought fraternity, talking about equality without fraternity is meaningless. So when we decided that we want to have a discussion on Republic Day, today we thought it's a good idea to talk about equality and fraternity together. And we got very lucky in the speakers that we have today. I will first start with Professor Tarikere. And when we were discussing, when Professor Tarikere and I and Leah were discussing, and he said in Kannada, Samvidhanada modulu, Samvidhanada maulyagalu. Said, so just for Mary and Gautam, he said, so you want to talk about constitution values before the constitution. So, Professor Tarikere avare, now one criticism anta helodadre ನಾವು ಸಂವಿಧಾನದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, it is ಇದು ಬೇರೆ ಎಲ್ಲಿಂದಾನೋ ನಾವು ಕಾಪಿ ಮಾಡಿಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀವಿ. It's a fully copied value system that was imposed on us. ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ತರದ ಮೌಲ್ಯಗಳು, ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂಸ್ ಡಿಡ್ ನಾಟ್ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ಎನಿ ರೂಟ್ಸ್, ಅಂದರೆ ಅದು ಯಾವುದೋ ಮೊಳಕೆಗಳೇ ಇಲ್ಲ ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂತ ಅದೊಂದು ಇಟ್ಸ್ ಎ ಕ್ರಿಟಿಸಿಸಮ್ ದಟ್ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂಸ್ ಈವನ್ ಟುಡೇ, ಬೋತ್ ಫ್ರಮ್ ಸೀರಿಯಸ್ ಸ್ಕಾಲರ್ಸ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ವಿತ್ ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್ ಐಡಿಯಾಲಜಿ ಡಿಫರೆನ್ಸಸ್. ಸೊ ಆದರೆ ಯುವರ್ ವರ್ಕ್ focuses a lot not only on the differences but also on the syncretic culture. And fraternity ontara is syncretism, and you have written a lot about this. So tamma abhiprayadalli ee fraternity ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವ ಅನ್ನೋದು ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾರತ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಯಾವುದೇ ನಮಗೆ ಯೋಚನೆನೇ ಇರಲಿಲ್ವಾ? ಇದು 1950ರಿಂದ ಒಂದು ಹೊಸ ಮೌಲ್ಯನ, ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಯಾರು ಮೊದಲು ಯೋಚನೆನೇ ಮಾಡಿರಲಿಲ್ವ? ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ನಾವು ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಇಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಕಷ್ಟ ಪಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀವ ಇದನ್ನ ನೋಡೋದಕ್ಕೆ?
ಮೊದಲನೇದಾಗಿ ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬರಿಗೆ ಈ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಯನ್ನು ಕೇಳಲಾಯಿತು. ನೀವು ಫ್ರೆಂಚ್ ರೆವಲ್ಯೂಷನಿಂದ ಈ ಪ್ರಿಯಾಂಬಲಲ್ಲಿ ಹಾಕಿರೋ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂಸ್ನ, ಮೌಲ್ಯಾದರ್ಶಗಳನ್ನು ತಗೊಂಡಿದ್ದೀರಿ ಅಂತ. ಆದರೆ 1954ನಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ರೇಡಿಯೋ ಟಾಕಲ್ಲಿ ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬರು ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಹಾಗಂತ ಹೇಳಲಾಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ, ಆದರೆ ನಿಜವಾಗ್ಲೂ ನಾನು ತಗೊಂಡ್ರದ್ದು ಬುದ್ಧನಿಂದ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಈಗ ಬುದ್ಧನ ಮೂಲಭೂತ 2 ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ಗಳಂದರೆ ಪ್ರಜ್ಞೆ ಮತ್ತು ಮೈತ್ರಿ. ಪ್ರಜ್ಞೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಜಗತ್ತನ್ನು, ನಮ್ಮ ಸಮಾಜನ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋಕ್ಕೆ ಬುದ್ಧಿಯನ್ನು, ತರ್ಕವನ್ನು ಬಳಸಿ ಅರ್ಥ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದು, ನಮ್ಮ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಏನು ಅಂತ. ಅದು ಬುದ್ಧಿಗೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಸಿದ್ದು. ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬರು ಅದನ್ನು ಸೋರ್ಡ್ ಅಂತ ಕರೀತಾರೆ. ಆದರೆ ಈ ಸೋರ್ಡ್ ಇರೋ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಗೆ, ಬೌದ್ಧಿಕ ಶಾರ್ಪ್ನೆಸ್ ಇರೋ ವ್ಯಕ್ತಿಗೆ ಮೈತ್ರಿ, ಕರುಣೆ, ಅಂತಃಕರಣ ಇಲ್ಲ ಅಂದರೆ ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವ ಅಲ್ಲೇ ಲಿಂಕ್ ಆಗ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಅದು ಬಹಳ ಅನಾಹುತ ಮಾಡ್ತದೆ. ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಆ ಬುದ್ಧಿ ಇರೋರಿಗೆ ಒಂದು ಮೈತ್ರಿ ಕೂಡ ಬೇಕು. ಮೈತ್ರಿ ಮತ್ತು ಕರುಣೆಯೇ ಬುದ್ಧಿಸಮ್ನ ಸಾರ. ಹೀಗಾಗಿ ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬರು 1954ನಲ್ಲಿ ಅದನ್ನು ಹೇಳಿದರು. ನಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ ಅವರು ಬೌದ್ಧ ಧರ್ಮಕ್ಕೆ ಸ್ವೀಕಾರಕ್ಕೆ ತಯಾರಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದರು. ಆ ಕಾರಣದಿಂದಲೂ ಅದನ್ನು ಕನೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಬುದ್ಧಿಸಮ್ಗೆ. ಆದರೆ ಫ್ರೆಂಚ್ ರೆವಲ್ಯೂಷನಿಂದ ಕೂಡ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸ್ ಆಗಿರೋದು ನಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ. ನನ್ನ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಏನು ಅಂದರೆ, ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬರು ನನ್ನನ್ನು ಪ್ರಭಾವಿಸಿದ 3 ಗುರುಗಳು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳುವಾಗ, ಬುದ್ಧ ಈಸ್ ಮೈ ಫಾಸ್ಟ್ ಗುರು, ಸೆಕೆಂಡ್ ಗುರು ಈಸ್ ಕಬೀರ್, ಆ್ಯಂಡ್ ಥರ್ಡ್ ಆಫ್ ಕೋರ್ಸ್ ಜ್ಯೋತಿಬಾ ಫುಲೆ. ನನಗೆ ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಮಿಸ್ಟಿಕ್ ಕಲ್ಟ್ಸ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿರೋ ನನಗೆ ಭಾರತದ ಒಬ್ಬ ದೊಡ್ಡ ರ್ಯಾಷನಲಿಸ್ಟ್, ಒಬ್ಬ ಬುದ್ಧಿಜೀವಿ, ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಷನಲ್ಲಿ ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡಿದ ಒಬ್ಬ ಕಾನೂನು ತಜ್ಞ, ಹೈಲಿ ಇನ್ಫ್ಲುಯೆನ್ಸ್ಡ್ ಬೈ ವೆಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ರ್ಯಾಷನಲಿಸಮ್, ಅವರು ಭಾರತದ ಒಬ್ಬ ಸಂತನನ್ನು ನನ್ನ ಗುರು ಅಂತ ಕರೆದದ್ದು ಯಾಕೆ ಅಂತ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಅನಿಸ್ತದೆ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ 16th ಸೆಂಚುರಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕಾಶಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಕಬೀರ್ ಬಂದಾಗ ಬಹಳ ಉಪಯುಕ್ತವಾದಂಥ ಎಕಾನಮಿಕ್ ಬೇಕಾದಂಥ ವೀವಿಂಗ್ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಟಿಗೆ ಸೇರಿದವನು. ಈ ಬಿಲಾಂಗ್ಸ್ ಟು ಜುಗಿ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಟಿ. ಜುಗಿ ಔಟ್ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಅಥವಾ ಬೈಕಾಟೆಡ್. ಅದು ಮುಸಲ್ಮಾನರು ಸೇರಿಸ್ತಾ ಇರಲಿಲ್ಲ ಮತ್ತು ಸವರ್ಣೀಯರು ಸೇರಿಸ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಸೊ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಉಪಯುಕ್ತವಾದ ಎಕಾನಮಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದು, ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕವಾಗಿ ಅಪಮಾನಿತರಾಗಿದ್ದ ಜುಗಿ ಕಮ್ಯುನಿಟಿಯ ಅವನು ಮತ್ತೆ ಮತ್ತೆ ಭಾಯ್ಚಾರದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾನೆ, ರಾಮ್ ರಹೀಮ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡ್ತಾನೆ. ಅವನು ರಾಮಪಂಥಿ ವೈಷ್ಣವಿ ಅವನು. ಸೊ ನ್ಯಾಚುರಲಿ ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬರಿಗೆ ಆ ಸಂತರ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಭಾವ ಈ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೂ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು. ಆ ಮೈತ್ರಿ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಆ ಶಬ್ದ ಅಷ್ಟೇ, ಏನು ಫ್ರಾಟರ್ನಿಟಿ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳ್ತಿದ್ದೀವಿ, ಅದು ಮೈತ್ರಿಲೇ ಇದೆ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಬುದ್ಧನ ಇಡೀ ಬದುಕಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರು ಅವನನ್ನು ವಿರೋಧಿಸ್ತಾರೆ ಅಥವಾ ಕೊಲ್ಲಕ್ಕೆ ಬರ್ತಾರೆ ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆ ಕೂಡ ಆತ ಸಂವಾದ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದ. ಹೀಗಾಗಿ ನಿಸ್ಸಂಶಯವಾಗಿ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಮೊದಲಿಂದಲೂ ಪರಂಪರೆಯಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಎಳೆಯಾಗಿ, ಪೂರ್ತಿ ಅಲ್ಲ, ನಮ್ಮ ಇಡೀ ಪರಂಪರೆ, ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವದ ಪರಂಪರೆ ಸುಳ್ಳದು. ಆದರೆ ನನಗೆ ಭಾಳ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ ಅನಿಸೋದು, ನಾವು ಇವಾಗ ಯಾವುದನ್ನು ಮಾಡರ್ನ್ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂಸ್ ಅಂತೀವಿ, ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಷನ್ ವ್ಯಾಲ್ಯೂಸ್ ಅಂತೀವಿ, ಅದರ ಬೇರುಗಳು ಹುಡುಕಿದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲೇ ಬೇಕಾದಷ್ಟಿವೆ. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ಇವನಾರವ ಎನಿಸದಿರಯ್ಯ, ಬಸವಣ್ಣವ್ರ ವಚನ. ಇವ ನಮ್ಮವ. ಅದರಿಂಗ್ ಅನ್ನೋದೊಂದು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಕಾಯಿಲೆಯಾಗಿ ಮಾರ್ಪಟ್ಟಿದೆ ಈಗ. ಕಮ್ಯುನಲಿಸಮ್ನ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಕಾಯಿಲೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಅದರಿಂಗ್. ನನ್ನ ಪ್ರಕಾರ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕದ ಅಥವಾ ಭಾರತದ ಮೀಡಿಯಾ ಸೃಷ್ಟಿ ಮಾಡಿರೋ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಹೇಯ ಶಬ್ದಗಳಂದರೆ ಅನ್ಯಕೋಮಿನ ಧರ್ಮದ, ಅನ್ಯ ಧರ್ಮದ, ಈ ಅನ್ಯ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದರಿಂಗ್, ಅದು ಭಾಳ ಅಶ್ಲೀಲ ಶಬ್ದ, ಅದು ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಕ್ರೂರವಾದ ಶಬ್ದ. ಹೀಗಿರುವಾಗ ಯಾಕೆ ಬಸವಣ್ಣವರು ತಮ್ಮ ಕ್ರಾಂತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನಮ್ಮವ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಬಯಸಿದರು? ಇದೆಲ್ಲ ಈ ಥರದ್ದು ಹುಡುಕ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು ಹರೀಶ್, ಈ ಥರ ಹುಡುಕ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು. ಬೇಕಾದಷ್ಟು ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ಸ್ ಕೊಡ್ಬೋದು, ನನಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿಲ್ಲ ಸಮಯ ಎಷ್ಟಿದೆ ಅಂತ.
ಮತ್ತೆ ಬರ್ತೀನಿ ನಾನು. ಸೊ ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಫಾರ್ ಪೀಪಲ್ ಹೂ ಡೋಂಟ್ ಅಂಡರ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಡ್ ಕನ್ನಡ, ಐ ಮೀನ್ ಐ briefly translate what Professor Tarikere said. He said, but the value of fraternity is something, he doesn't say it was spread across our culture and fully rooted in India, but there were strands that we can find of the idea of fraternity, which Professor Tarikere equates it to Maitri from the Buddha's thoughts. And Ambedkar himself in a 1954 interview said that he borrowed the idea of fraternity mainly from Buddha, Kabir and Jyotiba Phule. And Professor Tarikere believes that this concept of othering that we have created and the use of the word different religion or different caste or different anya is what he used. Othering of people into different characteristics or buckets is one of the worst things that, or worst terms that we have coined, is what Professor Tarikere comes. And is saying. And I think we'll come back to you, sir, to ask, how do we deal with this othering? But Gautam, I'm going to change the order a bit. I wanted to ask Professor Mary John, but I think from where Rahmat left, we assume, and many scholars make this point, that we just assume that once we adopted the constitution, then now it's only a question of implementation, right? Everything is set. So just merely declaring equality and fraternity as values, but still our entire history, and not just in the last 10, 12 years, in the last 20, 12 years, it may have been exacerbated, but the issues of communalism, the issues of othering, the issues of refuse or accepting certain segments of society as equal participants in society is something we have struggled with from 1950. So do you think the law has failed in a way to create the necessary roots to imbibe these values across society, or is that not the law's role?
That's an interesting question. It has to be the law's role. The question is whether it has succeeded or not, and I would almost unhesitatingly say that it has not. And one of our most significant problems in this country today is the growth or the acceleration in the process of othering, whether it is on the basis of religion, caste, gender, a variety of discriminations. See, this word fraternity is a very strange word in the context of our constitution. Take the two words together, fraternity and equality. You find the word equality in some variant or the other enters part 3 of the constitution. Fraternity is introduced in the preamble and sort of remains there. And for some time, I've been trying to grapple with what was it that Baba Saheb was trying to convey. And I'm really now beginning to wonder whether this was something that was lost in translation. Fraternity meaning what? Amity? Togetherness? Maitri, it would translate to friendship. Is this a word that is simply taken from the French Revolution, liberté, égalité, fraternité, and just inserted here without context? But we have to give it context. If it is there in the preamble. So what is the context that we would have to give it? Now, it's an odd word. And let me just go back and accept, one must accept that if it is an insertion by Baba Saheb Ambedkar, it comes because of the various influences in his life and his belief system. There are peculiar concepts linguistically that do not readily translate between faith systems. Let me explain what I mean. Many of us are familiar with the phrase borrowed from German Schadenfreude, which is an irrational delight in the misfortunes of others. There is no antonym for this in the English language. There is not. But you will find one, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, in Buddhist philosophy, because mudita is a phrase that tells you that you must have irrational joy in the good fortunes of strangers. Now, this is an antonym that comes as an influence into this package of fraternity. And I'm saying that fraternity has contextually two contexts. One is between the individual citizens. The second, and I'm still grappling with the formation of this idea, it's only a very nascent thought. I'm not finding enough literature on this, is that I believe fraternity is tied inherently to the concept of nationhood as one nation. If you take the concept of fraternity out, it seems to me that you do significant damage to the concept of a single united nation, which is the essence of the idea of India in a very, very pluralistic, diverse society. Fraternity has its place there. What is the role of the law, which is Harish's question, which is to inform the operation of the concept of fraternity in the context of both a unity of a nation and at an individual level. This necessarily eliminates any legal principle that fosters or encourages a process of us versus them, a process of othering, a process of marginalization, a process of non-integration. And I fear that many of our laws are now being designed in a way or being interpreted in a way to precisely permit this process of fragmentation of the nation and of individuals one against the other as components of that nation. It is the law's mandate, it's the constitutional mandate, not to allow this process of alienation, societal alienation, and othering. Our laws, I don't think, are driving in that direction. They're driving towards an isolation of individuals into silos. This is becoming a real problem. I'm sorry, I don't know if this sort of makes sense.
No, I think I asked you a question all of us are grappling with, so I'm sure we'll come back to some answers on this question. Now, Professor John, you were worked with equality a lot, particularly, women and equality. And again, this was for both for legal scholars and scholars interested in how rights develop. I think many of the members of the Constituent Assembly themselves admitted that a lot of these values are aspirational in character at that time in 1950. So, but how have you seen equality develop post 1950, both particularly in terms of women, because that's the area that you have worked. I mean, did women on 27 January, did they feel equal citizens? Do they feel equal citizens now? Are there many barriers that, we all know some of the, the people talk about glass ceilings, other daily barriers in professions, in society, within homes, in cultures, all these things. But how do you think this equality has worked so far for women? I know it's a very broad question, but
actually, before I answer that, I'd like to add my very preliminary thoughts on the fraternity, if I may. Yeah. Because I was very intrigued that, in fact, you have chosen to use this word, which, as everyone has said, is the term equality has had a lot of space. Fraternity, not so. And as others have mentioned, it did come from the French Revolution. And it was meant, when it came in the French Revolution, it was meant to announce a break from feudal hierarchies. Okay? And it literally does mean brotherhood. It literally was an equation, a new equation for modern society from a feudal moment where they were not brothers, where people were in terms of status. And very interesting also theories around, not enough by feminists, I think, on fraternity. Again, I think all over the world it has not been given its due. But Carol Pateman, I'll just give one example of a very interesting feminist who has looked at fraternity as very central to the making of modern life in Europe, where it was a sexual contract between men who are now brothers under the new state. The new state was the father. brothers under the new state, with the sexual contract being now they would have control over women in family life, in private life, right? So there was still control here. Equality, yes, in terms of this brother. So it was literally a brotherhood that excluded women. And I think that's something we should think about. It was not a sorority, it was a fraternity. Okay? So when I think a little bit that I've read of Ambedkar's, I connect his deep, deep investment in fraternity in relation to what he said in The Annihilation of Caste, where he basically said, we are not a society. Because we have hierarchies of caste, because we are separated from each other, we are asocial as a people, we need to develop bonds of kinship and belonging, which equality will not do, for which you need fraternity. He hoped that reservations would do it, that is to say, bringing certain people who are otherwise unequal into common spaces of influence. He also thought it could be done through intermarriage. He proposes intermarriage as the dissolution of caste and the bringing together of kinship. He believed, rightly or wrongly, Muslims, Christians have this feeling of kinship, which Hindus lack because of caste divisions, because of endogamy. So my doubt, though, is that if intermarriage is going to be the way, then you're using women as a means to achieve it. So they're the traffic. They're the traffic. They're the means to create brotherhood, okay, across groups, across classes, but women are the instrument. So where are we? Now, we are not like the French. The French did not give women citizenship rights till 1944. I think we forget this, 1792, 1944. We got it straight off, right? We assumed you would get it and we got it, right? But did we get genuine siblinghood? If you want to change the word fraternity to siblinghood, right? Being brothers and sisters together, that I doubt that we have achieved that. So I'd like to stave off the question of equality maybe to the next round and just contribute to the fraternity discussion now.
No, so then let me then stay with you and then go into equality, and then maybe in the next round we try and bring equality and fraternity together. If you, in terms of, so I asked you,
yes,
what did women think that on 27
yes.
January 1950 did they feel, okay, we're now part owners of this country? Because one of the things that has struck me, and what I heard once from L.C. Jain saying, is that he said when he was taking 15th August as the relevant date, he said on 15th August we all became part owners of this country. We are not citizens. We are not subjects. We are owners. And 26th January, was just a confirmation that we are not going to go back to some other form of rule, but a democracy and a republic. So did on 27th January or on 15th August 1947 or on 27th January 1950, did women feel that they're owners of this country? I think that's a question, And do they feel that they're owners of this country now? And apart from, the context of, professions and rights and other things, if you look at politically, we had a female prime minister much before, almost everyone else in the world. I mean, is that just a symbolic thing, or is that there are other reasons for it? Again, I know I'm asking you a very broad question, but I'll
try and say a few things. One is, let us go back to the Constituent Assembly and the women. There were 15 women who were part of what was over 200 members. And the curious thing is, and I'm saying this as a self-criticism, as a women's studies scholar, we have tremendous scholarship on the early women's organizations that began in the 1920s, 30s. But we have very, very little on the women in the Constituent Assembly. We have not paid it. There are a few names we all know, Hansa Mehta, Rajkumari Amrit Kaur, and Durgabai Deshmukh, and so on. But we never, it's just this last year. It's only in this last year that I can think of two books.
2 books that have come out.
Achyut Chetan's Founding Mothers, and The 15, as it's called, by Aribam and Satyavadi. So it's very curious, and this is self-critique because I've looked at this period, but I was very cursory in my treatment of the constituent period because the women's voices are more or less absent. We hardly hear them. And they have done us the benefit of going behind the scenes and recognizing the kind of work they did. they did not speak very much in the Constitution. And it's true, they did take equality for granted. I mean, it was promised already in the Karachi Resolution. So this was something that went back to the 1930s. They did not imagine for a moment that they would not get it. They were ready to believe in what we call formal equality. And I think today we are very dismissive of formal equality. We recognize how limited it is. But for them, it was revolutionary. Because you must imagine a history where nation was family, women were mothers of the nation, Bharat Mata, this is what they were living with. So the idea that we could be equal citizens, equal as individuals, regardless of familial roles, that is revolutionary. I mean, I would say it's revolutionary today as well. I don't think we even have reached that stage today as well. We're still identified by family roles and so on. So this is revolutionary on the one hand. On the other hand, they also inherited, or they also believed very strongly in the secular idea of equality, which meant no place for religious differences. They were totally wedded to the idea of a uniform civil code. For them, equality and uniformity had to go together. For them, diversity meant inequality. So they did not want to even see, this is a very radical, they did not even want to see freedom of religious faith and practice. They thought this would be detrimental to women's rights. They were anti-reservation. This was the degree of formal equality that they believed in. So even Velayudan, the only Dalit woman was anti-reservation. Even for scheduled castes. I mean, she was a Gandhian, so there's complicated, very interesting politics behind it, but they were resolutely anti-reservation. No, women needed no special favors here. Such was their faith that the future would be a new one. So we might say this is naive. So this is the combination. The other amazing thing I discovered from these books was that these women were not only concerned about women's rights. They spent enormous time on economic rights, which made its way to the directive principles, right? And on laws regarding detention. I was very amazed to think of that they had known imprisonment. They or family members had known imprisonment. So these were areas where they spent even more effort in the subcommittees than they did with women's rights, which they more or less thought was a given. So this is about them. I'm just staying with them for a moment.
Okay, I will come back to you on, sort of on where we are today in the next round. Maybe that's something you could give us short thought about addressing that question. Rahmat sir, what Professor Mary John also talked about, equality, formal equality. Now, ಈ ಕಾನೂನಿನ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಕೋನದಿಂದ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ, if you look at it from a viewpoint of law or the constitution, there's a formal equality. There are some ಸಮಾನತೆ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಕೆಲವು ಆರ್ಟಿಕಲ್ಗಳಿವೆ. For example, abolition of untouchability, reservation for certain socially and economically backward classes. That's a phrase used in the constitution. ಅದು ಸಬ್ಸ್ಟ್ಯಾಂಟಿವ್ ಈಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿಗೆ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ದಾರಿ ಹಾಕೊಟ್ಟಾಗೆ. There was a path to substantive equality. There's no substantive path to fraternity, as all of us recognize. But ನೀವು ಸಮಾಜದ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಕೋನದಿಂದ ನೋಡಿದಾಗ, if you look at it from a societal perspective, how does one feel equal? Or how does one feel a sense of fraternal, or rather, to borrow Professor John's word, siblinghood. ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವನೇ, ಬಟ್ ಸಿಬ್ಲಿಂಗ್ಹುಡ್. ಅಂದರೆ ನಾಟ್ ಫ್ರೆಟರ್ನಿಟಿ ಬಟ್ ಸಿಬ್ಲಿಂಗ್ಹುಡ್. ಸಮಾಜದ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಕೋನದಿಂದ ನಾವು ಬೇರೆ ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ನಾವು ಸಮಾನರು ಅಂತ ತಿಳ್ಕೊಳೋದಕ್ಕೆ ಸಮಾಜ ಅಂದರೆ ಎಲ್ಲಾರು ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕೈ ಜೋಡಿಸ್ಬೇಕಾ, ಅಥವಾ ಅದು ಮನಸ್ಸಿನಿಂದ ಬರುತ್ತಾ, ಅಥವಾ ಅದು ಧರ್ಮದಿಂದ ಬರುತ್ತಾ, ಹೇಗೆ?
ಹರೀಶ್, ಈ ಸಮಾನತೆ ಅಥವಾ ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವದ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮನ್ನು, ಆ ಕಲ್ಪನೆಯನ್ನು ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮಟೈಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕು ನಾವು. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ನಾವು ಟ್ರೆಡಿಷನ್ಗೆ ಹೋಗೋಣ. ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವದ ಕಲ್ಪನೆ ಪ್ಲೇಟ್ ಮಾಡಿರೋದು, ಆರ್ಗ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡಿರೋದು ರಿಲಿಜಿಯಸ್ ಬೇಸ್ ಮೇಲೆ, ಸಾಮಾಜಿಕ ಅಲ್ಲ. ಉದಾಹರಣೆಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಮೊದಲನೇ ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಕವಿರಾಜ ಮಾರ್ಗ, ಅದು ರಾಜಪ್ರಭುತ್ವದ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿ ಸಂವಿಧಾನದ ಆಶಯಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಳುವ ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್ ಅಂತ ನನ್ನ ಅಭಿಪ್ರಾಯ. ಸಿನ್ಸ್ ದ ಪೊಯಿಟ್ ವಾಸ್ ಜೈನ, ಬಿಲಾಂಗ್ಸ್ ಟು ಮೈನಾರಿಟಿ. ನೆರೆ ಸೈರಿಸಲಾರ್ಪಡೆ ಪರಧರ್ಮಮಂ ಪರವಿಚಾರಮಂ, ಬೇರೆಯವರ ವಿಚಾರನ, ಬೇರೆಯವರ ಧರ್ಮನ ಸಹಿಸೋದು, ಸೈರಣೆ, ಟಾಲರೇಷನ್, ಆ ಟಾಲರೆನ್ಸ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ ಅದೇ ಗೋಲ್ಡ್ ಅಂತ ಅವನ ಆರ್ಗ್ಯುಮೆಂಟ್. ರಾಜಪ್ರಭುತ್ವದ ಕಾಲದಲ್ಲಿದ್ದಾನೆ, ಆದರೆ ಒಂದು ನಮ್ಮ ಆಧುನಿಕ ಕಾಲಕ್ಕೆ ಬೇಕಾದ ಮೌಲ್ಯಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಳ್ತಿದ್ದಾನೆ. ಯಾಕಂದರೆ ಜೈನಿಸಮ್ ಮತ್ತು ವೈಷ್ಣವಿಸಮ್, ಜೈನಿಸಮ್ ಮತ್ತು ಶೈವಿಸಮ್ ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಳ ಕ್ಲಾಶಸ್, ಎಷ್ಟು ಬ್ಲಡ್ ಶೆಡ್ಸ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆಗಿದೆ ಮಿಡಿವಲಲ್ಲಿ. ಆಮೇಲೆ ಅದು ಹಿಂದೂ ಮುಸ್ಲಿಮ್ ಎಲ್ಲ ಆಯಿತು. ಸೊ ನಾವು ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವದ ಕಲ್ಪನೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಟ್ರೆಡಿಷನಲ್ ನೋಡೋದು ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕವಾಗಿ, ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳು, ವೈಷ್ಣವ, ಶೈವ, ವೈಷ್ಣವ, ಜೈನ, ಹಿಂದೂ, ಮುಸ್ಲಿಂ, ಈ ಥರದ್ದೇನೆ ನೋಡ್ತಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ದಾರಾಶಿಕೋ ಮಜ್ಮೌಲ್ ಬಹರೈನ್ ಅಂತ ಒಂದು ಪುಸ್ತಕ ಬರೀತಾನೆ. ಹಿ ಟ್ರಾನ್ಸ್ಲೇಟ್ಸ್ ಉಪನಿಷತ್ ಇಂಟು ಪರ್ಷಿಯನ್. ಅಥವಾ ಅಕ್ಬರ್ನ ದೀನ ಇಲಾಹಿ ಇರ್ಬೋದು. ಅನೇಕ ರೂಲಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಕೂಡ ಒಂದು ಸುಗಮವಾದ ಆಡಳಿತ ಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದಕ್ಕೆ, ಒಂದು ಗವರ್ನೆನ್ಸ್ಗೆ ಕೂಡ ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಸಂಘರ್ಷ ಆಗಬಾರ್ದು ಅನ್ನೋ ಕಾರಣಕ್ಕೆ ಕೂಡ ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವ, ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವ ಅಂತ ಕರಿಬೋದು. ವೆರಿ ಇಂಟ್ರೆಸ್ಟಿಂಗ್ಲಿ 1925 ನಾಲ್ವಡಿ ಕೃಷ್ಣರಾಜ ಒಡೆಯರ್ ಒಂದು ಅವರ ಸಿಂಹಾಸನಾರೋಹಣದ ಬೆಳ್ಳಿ ಹಬ್ಬಕ್ಕೆ ಒಂದು ಪತ್ರ ಜಾಹೀರು ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. ಅದ್ರ ಉರ್ದುನಲ್ಲಿದೆ, ಒಂದೇ ಟೆಕ್ಸ್ಟ್, ಇಂಗ್ಲೀಷಲ್ಲಿದೆ ಮತ್ತು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿದೆ. ಆ ಮೂರು ಭಾಷೆಗೆ ಸಂಬಂಧಿಸಿದ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳು ಇನ್ಕ್ಲೂಸಿವ್ ಆಗಿರಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಥರದ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್. ಸೊ ಹೀಗಾಗಿ ರೂಲಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಲಾಸ್ ಕೂಡ ಇದನ್ನು ಬಯಸ್ತಾ ಇತ್ತು, ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕ ಸಮುದಾಯಗಳು. ನಮ್ಮ ರಾಜರು ತಮ್ಮ ಇನ್ಸ್ಕ್ರಿಪ್ಷನಲ್ಲಿ ಏನು ಡಿಕ್ಲೇರ್ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ಬಹುಧರ್ಮ ಧೇನು ನಿವಹ ಆಡುಂಬಲಂ, ಅಂದರೆ ಬಹಳ ಧರ್ಮಗಳು ಈ ನನ್ನ ರಾಜ್ಯದ ಹುಲ್ಲಿನ ಮೈದಾನದಲ್ಲಿ ಹಸುಗಳಾಗಿ ಮೇಯುತ್ತಿವೆ ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ಈ ಥರದ್ದು ನಾವು ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು. ಆದರೆ ನಿಜವಾಗ್ಲೂ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಇರೋದು ಎಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂದರೆ, ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಹೈರಾರ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವದ್ದು. ಇದು ಬಹಳ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ಯಾಟಿಕ್. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬರು 1922 ಅಂತ ಕಾಣ್ತದೆ, ಇಂಗ್ಲೆಂಡಿಂದ ಶಾಹು ಮಹಾರಾಜ್ಗೆ ಬರೆದ ಪತ್ರದಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ಯೂಸಸ್ ದ ಫ್ರೇಸ್ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಡೆಮಾಕ್ರಸಿ. ಪೊಲಿಟಿಕಲ್ ಡೆಮಾಕ್ರಸಿಗೆ ಇಡೀ ದೇಶ ಹೋರಾಡ್ತಿರುವಾಗ ಅವ್ರು ಬಯಸ್ತಿರೋದು ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಡೆಮಾಕ್ರಸಿ ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಡೆಮಾಕ್ರಸಿನ ನೀವು ಆರಂಭ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರಿ ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ಅಲ್ಲಿ ನಿಜವಾಗ್ಲೂ ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವದ ಸಂಗತಿ ಇದೆ. ಒಂದು ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್, ಸುಮ್ಮನೆ DSS ಆರಂಭ ಆದಾಗ DS ಇಂಟರ್ವೆನ್ಷನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿತ್ತಲ್ಲ, ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಕ್ಲಾಶಸ್ ನಡೆದ ಹಳ್ಳಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ಅವ್ರಿಗೆ ಕೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದು ಅಲ್ಲಿನ ಸವರ್ಣೀಯರು ಒಂದೇ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ, ಅಣ್ತಮ್ಮಂದ್ರಂಗಿದ್ವಿ ನಾವು, ನೀವ್ಯಾಕೆ ಬಂದು ಕೆಡಿಸಿದ್ರಿ ಅಂತ. ಈ ಅಣ್ತಮ್ಮ ಅನ್ನೋ ಕಾನ್ಸೆಪ್ಟ್ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಅದು ಹೈರಾರ್ಕಿನ ಒಪ್ಕೊಂಡು ಕೆಳಗಿರೋರು ಹೈರಾರ್ಕಿ ಒಪ್ಕೊಂಡಿರುವಂಥ ಸಾಮರಸ್ಯ, ಅದು ಅಸಮಾನತೆಯ ಸಾಮರಸ್ಯ. ಅದನ್ನು ನಿಜವಾಗ್ಲೂ DSS ಕ್ವಶನ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಿತ್ತು. ಅದರಿಂದ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಭಾಳ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಇರೋದು, ನಾವು ಈ ಸಾಮರಸ್ಯನ, ಪ್ಲೂರಲಿಸಮ್ನ ಹಿಂದೂ ಮುಸ್ಲಿಮ್ನ ಫ್ರೇಮ್ಗೆ ಹಾಕಿ ಶ್ರಿಂಕ್ ಮಾಡಾಕ್ಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀವಿ. ನಿಜವಾಗ್ಲೂ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ ಇರೋದು ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಹೈರಾರ್ಕಿ ಇರೋ ಸೊಸೈಟಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಜಾತಿಗಳ ನಡುವಿನ ಸಮಾನತೆ. ಆದರೆ ಜಾತಿ ವಿನಾಶ ಆಗದೆ ಜಾತಿ ಸಮಾನತೆ ಬರೋದೇ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಇದು ಬಹಳ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್. ಅದರಿಂದ ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ ಧಾರ್ಮಿಕರು ಭಾಯ್ಚಾರ ಆರ್ಗ್ಯೂ ಮಾಡೋದು ಭಾಳ ಈಸಿ. ಈ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಇದೆಯಲ್ಲ, ಮೇಡಮ್ ಎತ್ತಿದ್ದು ಜನರ ದೃಷ್ಟಿಯಿಂದ ಎತ್ತಿದ್ರು, ಜಾತಿಯಿಂದ ದಲಿತರು ಈ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆ ಎತ್ತುತ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಈಕ್ವಾಲಿಟಿ ಅಂತೂ ಭಾಯ್ಚಾರ ಅಂದರೆ ಹೆಂಗೆ? ಈಗ ಯಾವುದೇ ಜಾತ್ರೆ ನೋಡಿ, ಆ ಜಾತ್ರೆಯ ವರ್ಣನೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಪತ್ರಿಕೆಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಂಗೆ ವರದಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಮುದಾಯದ ಜನರು ಸೇರಿದ್ದರು ಅಂತ. ಆದರೆ ಯಾರ್ಯಾರಿಗೆ ಏನೇನು ಕೆಲಸ ಅಸೈನ್ ಮಾಡಲಾಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ ಆ ಹೈರಾರ್ಕಿ ಇದೆ. ಅದರಿಂದ ರಿಯಲ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮೆಟಿಕ್ ಏರಿಯಾ ಇಸ್ ಸೋಷಿಯಲ್ ಹೈರಾರ್ಕಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಭ್ರಾತೃತ್ವ ಹೇಗೆ ಸಾಧಿಸುವುದು ಅನ್ನೋದು. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾನೂನು ಲಾಗಳ ಕೆಲಸ ಎಷ್ಟು ಮಟ್ಟಿಗೆ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅಂತ ನಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ. ಬಟ್ ನಿಜವಾಗ್ಲೂ ಒಂದು ಮೈಂಡ್ಸೆಟ್ಟಲ್ಲೇ ಸ್ಟ್ರಕ್ಚರಲ್ ಆದ ಚೇಂಜಸ್ ಆಗಬೇಕಾದ ಅಗತ್ಯ ಇದೆ ಅಂತ ನಂಗೆ ಅನ್ಸುತ್ತೆ.
Okay, I think there is a lot of thoughts there. I will do my best to convey that to everybody. So, Professor Tarikere says that, instead of looking at it from a social perspective, fraternity and pluralism has been evident in our texts from historical times, from a long time. And he started with Kaviraja Marga, which is one of the earliest texts in this part of the world. The author talks, and the ruling class talked about the need to have people of all religions equally living in our kingdom and society. And he gave many examples. Darashiko's text, conversion of Upanishads into Persian and Urdu. Persian, not Urdu, Persian. And, and then the example of Nalvadi Krishnaraja Odayar in the Mysore kingdom. He says there are many examples, but generally it has been how different religions have to be treated equally. And I think the phrase he used was, all religions should grow in our grass. And I'm translating very loosely and crudely. Okay, all religions should grow in our garden. In a way, Kuempu Sarva Janangada Shantiya Tota. Okay, so I think, but all of that, he says, does not address the issue of brotherhood amongst castes. And even when people talk about, oh, we live like brothers in our village, why are you outsiders coming and talking about equality? He says, even when people say that we are living by brothers, there is a subsumed hierarchy there. And because you accept that hierarchy, you're happy to live as brothers. So shattering these hierarchies socially may be difficult. Is there a way in law? Is the question he's posing us. Leads to Gautam. We'll look at Gautam to see how the law has functioned. This is one of the questions I wanted to ask you, Gautam, even before we started. How do you think the law, the legal system, and judiciary in particular, and I think it's probably an unfair question to ask the judiciary, because you can only enforce what is made in the law, right, and protect the party rights. But has the judiciary used all the opportunities it has got to push forward ideas of equality? A fraternity, the judiciary has not addressed much at all. I think it's probably zero. I think maybe except the national anthem case in some sense, but even that did not really deal with the question. So fraternity, to answer Rahmat also, fraternity is not something the law has really been thinking about, nor has it given any thought, except in the, as Gautam said in his initial address, that the fraternity has been forgotten after being included in the preamble. So how do you think the law has reacted to demands of equality on a social plane? I know there's a lot of jurisprudence on reservations and equality and how it interplays, but how has the judiciary and the legal system reacted to demands of law on a social plane? I suppose the prime example is the Protection of Civil Rights Act, but that's just one example.
Consistently inconsistent. If that's in the shortest possible expression of it. In fact, I like this phrase siblinghood, because I think that's the correct understanding of it, especially in contemporary times. If you have to reinterpret or revisit fraternity, this is the only possible way to do this. Equality has, and look, let me just say something that's been troubling me for a very long time. The vocabulary of the Constitution and our received wisdom when it comes to questions of equality needs to be looked at again. I have developed a massive allergy to this expression backward. It has all kinds of connotations to this which need to be thrown out of the window, and in itself leads to a process of alienation and othering. The concept of an other backward class is even more hideous. It's even more hideous. You have to find better, more inclusive, less segregationist expressions for what you are trying to achieve here. In contemporary language, this can have no place, and unfortunately, it informs the decision-making process again and again and again. We are unable in the judiciary, and I'm telling you this from experience, to make the necessary nuanced adjustments. I'm not even saying distinctions, I'm saying adjustments towards achieving, equality is again a difficult concept, some level of acceptable societal parity. It becomes very difficult between religions. It becomes very difficult between gender. It becomes extraordinarily difficult when you have anything involving reservations, caste, and so on. It's a hideously complex business. 75 years after the Constitution, this is the question we should ask ourselves. Are we a more equal society? Are we a more just society? If you break this down even further, our cities, are they more equitable? Or have they become increasingly inequitable with greater discrepancies at every level? Between genders, economic, social, the disparities have grown. How has this happened on our watch? How have we allowed this to happen? And what have we done with this concept of fraternity and equality? I look, for example, to the body of law and say, let's see if there is a discerning, a unifying ideology, a jurisprudential ideology. You won't find it. You won't find it. You will find, as Harish says, a lot of law and pronouncements on reservations, education, schooling, and so on and so forth. Is there an ideological move from the judiciary towards a less inequitable society, a more inclusive society? We just use this phrase, but we are not able to achieve this. I am now wondering whether we are even actually striving for it. And I seriously have doubts whether we are just now in a system of inertia, just rolling through this and hoping that things will work out at some point or the other by default rather than design. We're really not able to achieve this. And again, I'm sorry to repeat this, but unless we change this vocabulary that we use as descriptors, we are going to continuously have greater difficulties in achieving this standard socially, jurisprudentially, in law, and under statute. It's going to be very difficult.
What do you think, if you were to identify a few steps that we can take to move towards, as Gautam was saying, to move towards a better equality, better fraternal society, what do you think those can be?
I'll turn it a little backwards. I will say, if I go by the history of the women's movement, we will have to first learn how to recognize inequalities. I don't think we have. And I'll just mention briefly this very famous report, Towards Equality report, was this first post-independence report produced in 1974 for the UN Year of Women 1975. All the UN countries were asked to put. And the authors of this report, who call themselves first-generation beneficiaries of the equality clauses of the Constitution, they saw themselves as beneficiaries. They did investigations of the first kind based on whatever statistical data they could find, some field investigations and so on. They were shocked because they assumed that things had got better. After independence, I'm not talking colonial period, after independence, the numbers of women compared to the numbers of men had come down after independence. Okay, so life chances of women were becoming less than those of men after independence. Employment was coming down. More women were working, gainfully employed in the colonial period than was true after independence. Okay, this is data they had till the 1970s, which, by the way, has continued to this very day. We have the lowest work participation rates for women in the world now. So I don't think we know this. I don't think the only sphere where we can, as you can imagine, where things got better for the middle classes was education. Women were getting into education, yes, but nowhere else. Political participation, they assumed with the presence of women in the national movement, no problem. That's why they were anti-reservation, because they said, we'll get it. We'll be part and parcel of this new state. Not so. 5% in the legislatures after independence, and the numbers since then. So we need to learn how and why inequalities are what they are and are increasing, as Judge said. Now we are a country where we have $167 billionaires. We are third as far as there's US, China, and then there's us. We have the very rich with first world salaries, equivalent to the population of Belgium. That's about 12 million. And then we have layers and layers and layers down to the poor. Poverty has, yes, declined. I don't think we should say it has become worse from the absolute levels of the past, but declined very little, and massive, massive increases in inequalities. Yeah, the gap is huge. So we have followed patterns of development that have resulted in a little decline in poverty, greater inequality, huge concentrations of wealth. And then imagine the various patterns of castes, groups, and so on that are more or less distributed in predictable ways, not always entirely predictable. So if we want to really look at inequalities, we have to look within scheduled castes, within scheduled tribes, who have today, in 2025, we have to go into the effectiveness of our reservation policies. Where are the women? How come there's almost parity in education? Our colleges are full of women, but where are they anywhere else? Nowhere. So unless and until we actually look at those processes, how are we going to come up with ideas about how to go forward? And because we're missing out on those, and because many of us are cocooned, I'm sorry to say, in our middle class worlds where things might be getting somewhat better in some respects, we may be having more respect as women in our worlds. We have a few women at the top. Always there'll be a few women at the top to prove how good we are, and I find that very irritating. Don't get me wrong, but I do find when we hear about Indira Gandhi, it's extremely, or Mandra Naik, or whoever, it's familial. It has nothing to do, others may be more interesting. Other leaders, Didi in Bengal, may be a more interesting figure for that, not part of a family.
So it's just a statistic to throw, we had a woman prime minister long ago, so what are you talking about?
Completely pointless. Because she was, if it had been a son, it would have been a son there, right? So it was nothing to do, and she was anti-feminist to boot. So it's not clear to me that she actually gave us what we needed at that time. So we have a few women at the top. And we're good, even in companies, we have a number of top women, yes, right? But look at the pattern elsewhere, right? So we need to, any group you name, we now are at a stage where even Muslims, there may be, in a family, a Muslim girl may be more educated than her brother. Because the brother has to find, so we need to sort of break things down and recognize the complexity of the nature of the inequalities in our midst, which are massive. We need to look at privilege, perhaps also. Given these huge inequalities, how come some of us are so privileged? And we like to only talk the language of merit. Why is that? It cannot be merit that accounts for what's going on. So I believe we need to investigate this further before we come up with solutions.
Sorry, slight digression, Harish, if you'll allow me. I've been working off and on, both in court and then elsewhere in research, on certain urban planning issues, environmental issues. And, bunch of us have come to this understanding of, trying to come to an understanding about this concept of spatial justice, especially in urban centers. And one of the thoughts that is beginning to emerge is the inequality in the use of open public spaces. And this is actually a very telling incident, because there are many, many ladies in this audience. The question we keep putting is, how safe do you feel in a public space? And if you don't feel confident and you don't have a sense of ownership and of right of a public open space, you have not achieved equality. You just have not. And by open space, I don't necessarily mean only a park or a playground. I'm talking even about a public street. You have to be able, across genders, to be able to use this as a user of the city on an equal footing and on the same terms. If you're not going to achieve that, equality is yet a dream. You haven't got anywhere near it.
Rahmat, to just follow from what Professor John and Justice Patel were saying, in the last 2-3 weeks, we have read in Rajasthan where a groom of a particular caste there were 200 policemen to ensure that he rides a horse to his wedding. Advando example. And this is not a new example. I think people get killed if they ride a horse. People belonging to certain castes ride a horse in their wedding. That's one example. Then in our own state, temple entry even now is a problem. Correct. Ministers, some minister attended went to a temple, and then there was some purification after he left because he comes from a particular caste. There are
also dargahs.
The dargahs, ಅಲ್ವಾ?
Yeah.
ಸೊ ಒಂದು ತಾವು ಹೇಳಿದ್ರೆ ಕಾನೂನಿಂದ ಏನಾದ್ರೂ ಮಾಡ್ಬೇಕಾದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ, ಬಟ್ ಈಗ ಆಕ್ಸೆಸ್ ಟು ಟೆಂಪಲ್ಸ್ ಫಾರ್ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಇಸ್ ಸೆಟ್ ಔಟ್ ಇನ್ ದ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಷನ್. ಯು ಕಾಂಟ್ ಪ್ರಿವೆಂಟ್ ಆಕ್ಸೆಸ್ ಅಂತ ಟು ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಪ್ಲೇಸಸ್, ಪಬ್ಲಿಕ್ ಇದು ಅದೊಂದು. ಆದ್ರೂ ಕೂಡ ಸಮಾಜದಲ್ಲಿ ಗೋಯಿಂಗ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಬೀಟಿಂಗ್ ಅಪ್ ಆರ್ ಕಿಲಿಂಗ್ ಸಮ್ ಒನ್ ಫಾರ್ ರೈಡಿಂಗ್ ಎ ಹಾರ್ಸ್ ಇನ್ ಹಿಸ್ ವೆಡ್ಡಿಂಗ್, ವೆಡ್ಡಿಂಗ್ there is.
Harish,
so how do we address these things?
Very interestingly, ನೀವು ರಾಜಸ್ಥಾನದ ಎಕ್ಸಾಂಪಲ್ ಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ರಿಂದ ಹೇಳ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಸಿನ್ಸ್ ಐ ಹ್ಯಾವ್ ವರ್ಕ್ಡ್ ಆನ್ ಶಾಕ್ತಿಸಮ್ ಇರೋದು ಈಸ್ಟ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ, ಈಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ. ನೀವು ಮಾಂಸಾಹಾರದ ಸೇವನೆಯ ಒಂದು ಪ್ರಮಾಣ ನೋಡಿದರೆ ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಸಸ್ಯಾಹಾರಿಗಳಿರೋದು ಗುಜರಾತ್, ರಾಜಸ್ಥಾನ್ ಆ ಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ, ಅಂದರೆ ವೆಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ಪಾರ್ಟ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾದಲ್ಲಿ. ಅಂದರೆ ವರ್ಟಿಕಲ್ ಆಗಿ ಭಾರತನ ಹೇಗೆ ಸೀಳಿದರೆ ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಪ್ರಾಣಿ ದಯೆ, ಜೈನಿಸಮ್ ಕೂಡ ಅಲ್ಲಿದೆ. ಇರುವೆಗೆ ಸಕ್ಕರೆ ಹಾಕೋದು, ಈ ಥರದ್ದೆಲ್ಲ ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸ್ಗಳಿರೋದು ಈಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ಪಾರ್ಟಲ್ಲಿ. ಆದರೆ ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಅಸ್ಪೃಶ್ಯರ ಮೇಲೆ, ಮುಸ್ಲಿಮರ ಮೇಲೆ ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಹಿಂಸೆ ಆಗ್ತಿರೋದು ಆ ಭಾಗದಲ್ಲಿ. ಅಂದರೆ ಮಾಂಸಾಹಾರ ಮಾಡೋ ಶಾಕ್ತ ಪರಂಪರೆ ಇರುವ, ಗುಡ್ಡಗಾಡು ಪರಂಪರೆ ಇರುವ ಈಸ್ಟರ್ನ್ ಭಾಗಕ್ಕಿಂತ ಸಸ್ಯಾಹಾರ ಸ್ವೀಕಾರ ಮಾಡೋ ಜನರಲ್ಲಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಕಾಸ್ಟ್ ಹೈರಾರ್ಕಿ ಅಥವಾ ಅಸ್ಪೃಶ್ಯತೆ ದನಗಳ ವಿಷಯದಲ್ಲಿ ಹೊಡೆಯೋದು.
I want to translate this before I forget, because it's an important thought. Is what Professor Tariq is saying. If you see, because I took the example of Rajasthan, he said if you draw a line from north to south, the western part is sort of more vegetarian, believes in no animal cruelty, etc. The eastern part actually are, but the cruelty based on religion and caste is more in the western part, where they don't believe in animal cruelty.
Yeah.
So that's something is an interesting analogy is drawn. So
ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬರು ನನಗೆ, ಹರೀಶ್, ನನಗೇನು ಭಾರತದ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಅನಿಸ್ತಿದೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ನಾವು ಬಹಳ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಆದರ್ಶಗಳನ್ನು ಸ್ಪೆಲ್ ಔಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಷನಲ್ಲಿ, ನಮ್ಮ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ನಮ್ಮ ಪ್ರವಚನಗಳಲ್ಲಿ. ಆದರೆ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸ್ನಲ್ಲಿ ನಾವು ಅದನ್ನು ಮಾಡಲ್ಲ. ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬರು ಅದ್ವೈತದ ಮೇಲೆ ಒಂದು ಸಣ್ಣ ಟಿಪ್ಪಣಿ ಬರೀತಾರೆ. ಅದ್ವೈತ ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತದೆ? ಗವಿಹಸ್ತಿನೇ ಶುನಚೈವ ಶಪಾಕೇಚು ಪಂಡಿತಾ ಸಮದರ್ಶಿನಃ. ಆನೆ, ಹಸು, ನಾಯಿ ಮಾಂಸ ತಿನ್ನೋನು, ಇವರೆಲ್ಲರನ್ನೂ ಸಮದರ್ಶಿನ ಅದ್ವೈತಿ ಅದನ್ನು ನೋಡಬೇಕು ಅಂತ. ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಅದ್ವೈತ ಪರಂಪರೆ ಇದೆ ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ. ಅದನ್ನು ಕಲೀಲಿಕ್ಕೆ 10th century ಮನ್ಸೂರ್ ಹಲಲಾಜ್ he came to Sindh from Baghdad, and then he formed his Sufi philosophy, ಅನಲ್ ಹಕ್. ಅಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಇನ್ಫ್ಲೂಯೆನ್ಸ್. ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬ್ರ ಅಬ್ಸರ್ವೇಷನ್ ಏನು ಅಂದರೆ, ಎಲ್ಲ ಜೀವಿಗಳಲ್ಲಿ, ಚರಾಚರದಲ್ಲಿ ಆ ಕಾಸ್ಮಿಕ್ ಎನರ್ಜಿ ಅಂಶ ಇರೋದ್ರಿಂದ ಅವೆಲ್ಲದೂ ಸಮಾನ. ಥಿಯರಿಟಿಕಲಿ, ಫಿಲಸಾಫಿಕಲಿ ಕಾಸ್ಮಿಕ್ ಎನರ್ಜಿಯ ಅಂಶವೇ ಇದೆಲ್ಲ, ಎಲ್ಲ ಮನುಷ್ಯರು. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಶಂಕರಾಚಾರ್ಯರು ಕಾಶಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ನದಿಗೆ ಹೋಗುವಾಗ ದೂರ ಸರೇ ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದಾಗ, ನಾನು ದೂರ ಸರಿಬೇಕಾ, ನನ್ನ ದೇಹನೋ ನನ್ನ ಆತ್ಮನೋ ಅಂತ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ. ಆಗ ಶಂಕರಾಚಾರ್ಯರಿಗೆ ಬಹಳ, ಇವನು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಜ್ಞಾನಿ ಅಂತ. ಸೊ ದೇಹಕ್ಕೂ ಆತ್ಮಕ್ಕೂ ಭೇದ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀರಿ ನೀವು ಅಂತ. ಅದಕ್ಕೆ ಅವರು ಆಮೇಲೆ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರು. ನಮ್ಗೆ ಗೊತ್ತಿದೆ, ಇದು ಮನೀಷ ಪಂಚಕೆಲ್ಲ ಬರೆದ್ರು. ಅಂದರೆ ಬಾಬಾ ಸಾಹೇಬ್ರು ಏನು ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ ಅಂದರೆ, ಒಂದೊಮ್ಮೆ ಅದ್ವೈತವು ಫಿಲಸಾಫಿಕಲಿ ಇಷ್ಟು ರಿಚ್ ಆಗಿರೋ ಈ ದೇಶದಲ್ಲಿ, ಫಿಲಸಾಫಿಕಲ್ ಸ್ಕೂಲ್ ಸೋಷಿಯಲಿ ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸ್ ಆಗಿದ್ರೆ ಅಸ್ಪೃಶ್ಯತೆ ಇರ್ತಿರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ, ನಾನು ಬುದ್ಧಿಸಮ್ಗೆ ಹೋಗ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿರಲಿಲ್ಲ, ನಮ್ಗೆ ಯಾವ ನೋವು ಇರ್ತಿರ್ಲಿಲ್ಲ. ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶದ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಏನಂದರೆ, ಭಾಳ ದೊಡ್ಡ ದೊಡ್ಡ ಸಮಾನತೆ ತತ್ವನ ಆಡ್ತೀವಿ, ಸೋಷಿಯಲಿ ನಾವು ಹೈರಾರ್ಕಿಕಲ್ ಆದ ಇದನ್ನು ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಿ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಅವರ ಇದು. ಜಸ್ಟ್ ಐ ವುಡ್ ಲೈಕ್ ಟು ಕನ್ಕ್ಲೂಡ್, ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಬೀದಿನಲ್ಲಿ ಯಾರು ಹೊಡೆತ ತಿಂತಿದ್ದಾರೆ, ಒಂದು ಸಮಾಜದಲ್ಲಿ ಅಸಮಾನತೆ ಇರೋದನ್ನ ಹೆಂಗೆ ನೋಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ, ಲಿಂಚಿಂಗ್ ಯಾರ ಮೇಲೆ ಆಗ್ತಿದೆ? ಅಮೆರಿಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಲಿಂಚಿಂಗ್ ಬ್ಲ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಆಗ್ತಿದೆ. ಅತಿ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಜನ ಜೈಲಲ್ಲಿ ಬ್ಲ್ಯಾಕ್ಸ್ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಭಾರತದಲ್ಲಿ 4 ಸಮುದಾಯದ ಮೇಲೆ ಆಗ್ತಿದೆ. ಮಹಿಳೆಯರು, ಎಲ್ಲ ಜಾತಿ ಧರ್ಮಕ್ಕೆ ಸೇರಿದವರು, ಮುಸ್ಲಿಮ್ಸ್, ಆದಿವಾಸಿಗಳು ಮತ್ತು ದಲಿತ್ಸ್. ಸೊ ಅಸಮಾನತೆ ಇನ್ನು ನಮ್ಮ ಕಾನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಷನ್ ಕೆಳಗಡೆನೇ ಆಗಿರೋದಲ್ಲ, ರೂಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಲಾ ಕೆಳಗಡೆನೇ ಆಗಿದೆ ಈ ಲಿಂಚಿಂಗು, ಈ ಬೀದಿ ಹಲ್ಲೆಗಳೆಲ್ಲ. ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಸಂವಿಧಾನದಲ್ಲೂ ಇನ್ನೆಲ್ಲೋ ಸೇರಿಸೋದು ಅಥವಾ ನಮ್ಮ ನ್ಯಾಯಾಧೀಶರು ಹೇಳ್ದಂಗೆ ಆ ಶಬ್ದಗಳನ್ನು ಬದಲಾಯಿಸೋದು, ಶಬ್ದಗಳು ಬದಲಾಯಿಸ್ಬೋದು, ಅದ್ರ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಸಮಸ್ಯೆ ಇರೋದು ಪ್ರಾಕ್ಟೀಸ್ ಇದ್ದು ಅಂತ ನನ್ನ ಅಭಿಪ್ರಾಯ. ಹೀಗಾಗಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಅಲ್ಲಿ ಕುಂಭಮೇಳದಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು ಹೊಸ ರಾಷ್ಟ್ರದ ಕಲ್ಪನೆಯನ್ನು, ಹೊಸ ಸಂವಿಧಾನದ ಕಲ್ಪನೆಯನ್ನು ಇಂಟ್ರಡ್ಯೂಸ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಮುಸಲ್ಮಾನರಿಗೆ ವೋಟಿಂಗ್ ಹಕ್ಕನ್ನು ರದ್ದು ಮಾಡಲಾಗಿದೆ. ದಿಸ್ ಈಸ್ ದಿ ಕಾಂಟ್ರಡಿಕ್ಷನ್ ಆನ್ ಪ್ಯಾರಾಡಾಕ್ಸ್.
So again, a lot of complex, interesting thoughts, but to simplify, and this is something I think that most people will recognize it. Rahmat is saying that we are very good in grand principles. We announce grand principles. We are very good in giving seminars and lectures based on grand principles and ideas on grand principles. When it comes to practicing them in detail, we don't have, we don't have a track record. We don't have a good record at all. Then in terms of equality, he says we should examine what are the four, or which are the four communities that get beaten up mostly in India: women, Muslims, Dalits, one more, Adivasis. And he says he compares it to in the US, which is a community that gets beaten up the most and who are most in jail. It's mostly the African Americans, the black people. So he says it's similar. So it's evident that there is inequality, and he points out that this is post 1950. It has happened under a constitution that promises equality and fraternity. So we need to think of practical, implementable steps to achieve equality rather than mere grand pronouncements, which is what we have. And a sobering thought, and I'm sure all of us have read in the newspaper today about a new constitution that is being suggested by some people in the Kumbh Mela, where only people who follow Sanatan Dharma, it's a Sanatan constitution, etc. etc. I won't bore everybody with the details. Stop there. Now, Gautam, coming to you, taking off from where Rahmat left, is it the role of the law to suggest practical steps that can be implemented?
That's in the realm of legislation, and that would be very difficult for a court to do. A court will interpret a legislation and see whether it fits the standard of
Part 3.
Part 3, which is a variant on equality. It's not an absolute standard of equality. It's a series of steps designed to achieve societal equality. But courts shouldn't be doing it. Sometimes the courts, especially the Supreme Court, are a little more adventurous than they should be. But that's not necessarily a good thing, and often sets a very ugly precedent for future.
But can even law, even legislation, can we achieve this by legislation? Is this something that is
What equality?
Equality. Not as a principle, but steps, practical steps.
Well, you have to look at what's happening now, which is a concerted effort to dismantle steps taken towards achieving equality. It's a hot topic now, but let's look at this Places of Worship Act thing. It was an attempt to provide a level playing field at the simplest level, by providing a cutoff date and saying you don't go beyond this. And you accept it as it stands. Doesn't matter what religion of faith you're in, this is where it stands. Everything that is after this cutoff date or as on that cutoff date remains. We've opened a Pandora's box here. How are we doing this? This entire discussion in religion about essential religious practices is never going to result in an equitable standard. Since we're discussing this, and let's be frank about it, one of the very peculiar contestations that comes before the Bombay High Court, and it cycles around annually at the same time every year, is around the time of Bakri Eid. And we have this conflict between what is essentially a secular municipal requirement which is hygiene, and the demand for ritual animal slaughter. One is religious based, the other is urban based. Now, in a city like Mumbai, which is dense, houses are small, and if the demand is that we want to carry out this practice in small flats or apartments on higher floors, which have no provision for dealing with this, what confronts court is a very, very difficult situation. Should you permit this? When you say no, are you going against the religion? Are you being unequal? Or are you putting the interests of the city as a pluralistic city above that of a particular demand based on a reading of faith? Now, we've often had a situation in Mumbai. One of the examples given was even in Riyadh, they don't permit individual slaughter like this. It's organized. So when the municipal corporation says, for instance, that we'll organize it for you, there are certain places where we can do it. And the idea is, no, I don't want to go there. I want to do it in my 500 square foot flat. And how will I deal with the result of it is not my concern. Is a very peculiar contestation, and it tends to, unfortunately, warp the debate and becomes a needless debate about inequality. But these are different competing equities that are often colliding and are in head-on collisions with each other. I could say the same thing about gender, about caste, about various things like this that happen all the time. But these are examples where courts are confronted with what are essentially inconsistent or mutually destructive stands. Courts have to find some way to bridge them. They can't be prescriptive about what should be done. They can only take these two and try and find a median way out.
You have been listening to BIC Talks by Bangalore International Centre. If you like what you heard, do follow us on social media. Keep up with our programming by signing up for our mailer on the website or leave us a review or rating on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. The crew that makes these podcasts possible is Gaurav Krishna and Ishan Gupta on sound supervision and production, with support from S. Sarunaraj and Raghu Tenkaila. Artwork is designed by Chandni Venkataraman of Crisscross Design Studio. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel on your favorite podcast platform. It can also be accessed on our website, bangaloreinternationalcentre.org. This is Lekha Naidu signing off on behalf of everyone at BIC.